The rain in Providence was a cold, insistent lie, mirroring the emptiness in the warehouse. Rocco Bellini, known throughout the 5 boroughs and beyond as the Rock, stood motionless, the scent of damp concrete and metallic fear thick in the air. He was a monument of granite gray suit and unyielding muscle, a man who commanded silence just by existing. Tonight, however, the silence was shattered by a sporadic, rhythmic sound, the slow, sickening drip of blood pooling beneath the metal table. Rocco didn't look at the mess. He looked at the window, where the city lights bled through the grime, illuminating nothing but his own isolation. At 35, he was the youngest, most formidable boss the Bellini family had ever seen, yet the power felt less like an achievement and more like a carefully crafted prison. The only thing he truly trusted was the certainty of a calculated outcome, and the only emotion he allowed was the cold, focused precision of duty. A low groan broke the strained quiet. Marco, his lieutenant, stepped forward, wiping his hands on a pristine white handkerchief that instantly became stained. "The information is confirmed, boss. The supply lines are compromised. It points north." Rocco finally turned, his gaze 2 chips of frozen obsidian. "Confirmed isn't the word I need, Marco. Eliminated is the word I need." His voice was not a shout, but a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Find the source. Stop the leak. If the leak is a person, ensure they never ask for a favor again." His command was delivered with the casual finality of ordering coffee. Yet, beneath the veneer of total control, a tiny, almost imperceptible fissure was growing. It had started 3 weeks ago, a nagging sense of wrongness. He had crushed his rivals, streamlined the organization, and secured the family's future, but the victories felt hollow. He was winning a game he no longer cared to play. He dismissed Marco and stood alone in the vast space. It was in moments like these, when the blood had dried and the adrenaline receded, that the ghosts of his past, the family he lost, were loudest. He had built this empire to safeguard the memory of his childhood, yet in doing so, he had forfeited any chance at a future that held warmth, trust, or connection. He walked to the corner office, the opulent space feeling like a parody of success. The mahogany desk was flawless, the leather chair untouched. As he sat, his fingers grazed the cold metal of a small, antique silver locket he kept buried deep in his breast pocket, the only thing he carried from his mother. Just then, his secure line rang. It was an unknown number, registered miles away in the remote coastal wilderness of northern Maine, a place he hadn't thought about in 7 years. He almost ignored it. Routine dictated he ignore any number not vetted. But the relentless, silent drumming of the rain against the glass, combined with that deep, internal ache, made him pause. He answered. The voice on the other end was a harsh whisper, laced with panic and fear. "Rocco, you have to run. They know. They are coming for you right now, and they know where you hide." The voice was rough, altered by static, but the sheer terror conveyed was unmistakable. Rocco's training kicked in. He didn't ask who or how. He asked, "Who is this?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is the lighthouse. Go north, Rocco. Go to the only place you were ever safe. And don't stop until you hear the waves." The line went dead. Rocco stared at the phone, his mind racing. Who knew about that one quiet year, the year he tried to walk away and lived under a false name, the year he thought he could be someone else? Only one person knew the location of that secluded cottage by the sea, the place tied to his deepest, most dangerous secret. The woman he had met and walked away from without a word. He stood up, shedding the rigid facade of the Rock. The call hadn't been a warning about his enemies. It had been a plea from someone deeply entrenched in the life he'd been trying to escape. Was it a trap, or a desperate act of salvation? Was the threat to him, or to the mysterious caller? The sudden, sharp pulse of anxiety he felt wasn't for his own life, but for the safety of a ghost from his past. Rocco built a fortress to protect himself from the world, but is his greatest danger hiding in the world he tried to leave behind? What do you think motivated that panicked call? A desperate warning, or a deadly trap? Let us know in the comments below. Welcome back. Thank you for being here on this emotional journey. Today, we're diving into a powerful story of dangerous secrets, life-altering situation, and a love that survived betrayal. If you're ready, hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'll see you tomorrow with another story you won't want to miss. Rocco was driving north, the dark highway a blur beneath the constant stream of rain. The memory of the brief, panicked voice on the phone was the only thing cutting through his practiced detachment. His deepest fear wasn't death, it was being vulnerable. The mafia life was a shield, forged in the trauma of losing his family, a mother and sister, to a botched rival hit years ago. He had internalized that grief, transforming it into the merciless, efficient machine known as the Rock. His motivation was simple: ensure no one he cared about ever got close enough to be used against him, or worse, taken from him. He clutched the silver locket. It contained a faded picture of his sister, a girl who dreamed of being a marine biologist. Rocco's secret desire was to trade every ounce of his power for one more day of that simple, sunlit past. He had only allowed himself to feel true peace once, during that anonymous year in the coastal town 7 years prior, where he briefly lived under the name Leo. That peace had been tied directly to the woman who now haunted his mind. He knew going back was a risk, but the warning felt too urgent, too real to ignore. He was running not from danger, but towards the faint, impossible hope that someone, somewhere, still saw the man named Leo, not the monster named Rocco. Miles away, in the snug, sea-weathered town of Port Blossom, Maine, Dr. Alara Vance was finishing her 3rd shift in a row at the small community hospital. Her motivation was driven by a powerful, singular purpose: to protect her daughter, Sophia. Alara was not soft. She was tensile steel wrapped in a calm, professional exterior. She possessed an inner strength born of having to survive one of the most dangerous men in the country, a man she had loved under a different name. Alara's deepest fear was the moment Rocco Bellini's world would inevitably crash into Sophia's. She had seen firsthand the wreckage that followed him. She lived her life by routine, order, and self-imposed isolation, keeping her true past a closely guarded secret even from her few close friends. At home, the only light was the soft glow of the nightlight in Sophia's bedroom. Sophia, 5 years old, was a miniature sunbeam, all bright red hair and boundless curiosity. She had a distinct, deep-set concentration and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated, qualities that unnerved Alara because they mirrored a man she desperately tried to forget. Alara watched Sophia sleeping, her chest rising and falling softly. A worn, knitted elephant named Ellie was clutched in her small hand. Alara's heart ached with the weight of her secret. She had orchestrated her life to make sure Rocco never discovered Sophia, never knew he had a daughter. Her key supporting character was Martha Kincaid, the hospital administrator and Alara's neighbor. Martha was a gruff but maternal figure who sensed the deep sadness in Alara but never pushed. "You look like you haven't slept since the tide went out, dear," Martha observed the next morning over coffee. "Take a day. The clinic can handle a broken wrist without the chief resident." Alara forced a smile. "Just fatigue, Martha. Nothing a triple espresso won't fix." but the fatigue was compounded by the call she had made hours earlier. Ilara had been monitoring news streams related to the Bellini organization for years, a hidden safety measure. When the news of the warehouse raid and compromised supply line broke, she knew Rocco was in imminent danger. She risked everything, calling him with an untraceable burner phone to warn him away from the city, to lead him toward the only place he ever let his guard down, the abandoned cottage near Port Blossom. She didn't tell him why he had to run, only where. Because if he was safe, Sophia was safe. As she looked at Sophia tracing a pattern on the window with her finger, Ilara's emotional connection to Rocco, buried for 7 years, flared again, a painful mix of residual attraction and profound, life-altering fear. She knew this act of warning him was the catalyst. He was coming. And when he arrived, the fortress she had built around her daughter would shatter. If you had to choose between protecting your child from danger or protecting a dangerous man you once loved, what sacrifice would you be willing to make? Rocco drove the battered rental SUV up the gravel track leading to the isolated cottage. The lighthouse, stoic and lonely on the distant point, was the only witness to his arrival. The cottage looked exactly as he remembered, weathered gray wood, obscured by dense pine trees, smelling of sea salt and forgotten silence. He hadn't been here as Rocco Bellini, but as Leo Vance, a name he had picked off an old maritime registry. A ghost. He killed the engine. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the relentless sigh of the Atlantic. He checked the cottage first, moving with the practiced stealth of a predator. Empty. Safe. But the feeling of being watched, a prickly awareness that had saved his life countless times, tightened the muscles in his neck. He wasn't alone in this town. The central challenge was immediate. He needed supplies, information, and a way to confirm who had tracked him and why he had been warned. The only place in Port Blossom with any kind of centralized access to people and necessary resources was the small community hospital. He needed to feign an injury, a minor necessity to justify his sudden, mysterious presence in the quiet town. He chose a shallow but jagged cut on his forearm, making it look convincing without being debilitating. He drove toward the hospital, his mind already mapping out the staff and escape routes. He pushed through the hospital doors, the antiseptic smell a sharp contrast to the damp wood and salt he'd grown used to. The waiting room was sparse. The nurse at the counter, a woman with kind, tired eyes, directed him to examination room 3. Rocco sat on the crisp white paper, his gaze sweeping the room, anticipating a small-town doctor. The door opened, and his breath hitched. Standing there, holding a medical chart and looking 7 years older but infinitely stronger, was Ilara. She didn't flinch. Her face, usually a canvas of cool, professional calm, betrayed a flash of controlled shock, a flicker of recognition and instantaneous, profound fear. It was the best performance Rocco had ever seen. The way she held the chart was the only giveaway, her knuckles white against the cardboard. "Mr. Smith," she read, her voice steady, perfectly pitched for the clinical setting. "Let's take a look at that cut." How did this happen? Rocco, who had used Leo Smith as his alias, nearly laughed at the cosmic irony. "Fell on some rocks near the shore. I was hiking." She leaned in, her proximity sending a jolt of raw memory through him, the smell of lavender and sea air, the fire in her eyes, the one moment in his life he felt truly seen. He felt the pull of her, the romantic interest reignited instantly, yet now corrupted by secrecy and danger. "It needs stitches," Ilara said, avoiding his gaze and focusing entirely on the wound. "Local anesthetic should work." He watched her hands, precise and steady, moving with a confident grace he remembered well. He realized then that she was the one who called him. The realization slammed into him with the force of a bullet. She knew I was coming. She called me. As she prepped the needle, the door swung open without warning. A small figure stood in the doorway. It was Sophia, clutching a picture she'd drawn, a wonky crayon rendition of the lighthouse. "Mommy, Martha let me come find you," Sophia chirped, her voice clear and bright, stopping short when she saw the large, dark man on the table. Ilara froze, the syringe poised in the air. The temperature in the room plummeted. Rocco looked at the child. Red hair, bright as a flame under the fluorescent lights. That deep, intense concentration in her eyes. And those eyes, they were exactly the shade of cold, brilliant gray that his own eyes were. He saw his sister. He saw his younger self. He saw the very spirit he had sought to extinguish in himself. Sophia, sensing the tension, did something unexpected. She walked right up to Rocco's knee and held out the picture. "The lighthouse is sad without the sun. Will you draw the sun for it?" The demand, innocent and direct, broke Rocco's mental defense mechanism. He was a man who handled millions in illegal operations, who had ordered executions, who feared nothing, and this tiny girl asked him to draw the sun. He looked at Ilara, whose carefully constructed fortress had just been breached. Her face was a mask of terror and despair. In that instant, Rocco didn't need a DNA test or a confession. The sheer, undeniable truth was in the physical resemblance, the child's brazen confidence, and the mother's absolute panic. The child is his daughter. Ilara's secret was not just her past with him, but the living, breathing result of that past. Rocco, the mafia boss, the man built of rock, reached out a hand, not to intimidate, but to gently take the crayon from the child. As he began sketching a ridiculously cheerful sun onto the paper, he finally understood the secret. He was a father. And by extension, his enemies were now her enemies. The stakes had been raised to an unimaginable, agonizing height. Rocco has always sought to protect the memory of his lost family. Now that he knows he has a daughter, how do you think his dangerous mindset will change? Do you think Sophia's innocent question will be enough to soften the rock? Like and subscribe if you think this revelation changes everything for the Bellini family. The silence that followed Sophia's innocent request for a son was thicker than the storm outside. Ilara yanked the door shut, cutting off Martha's view. She snatched the crayon from Rocco, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury. "Get out," she hissed, her professional calm completely shattered. "You need to leave this room, leave this town, and leave our lives immediately." Rocco remained seated, his gaze unflinching as he looked from Ilara's panicked face to the drawing in her hand. "Our lives? Ilara, she has my eyes. She is mine." The certainty in his voice was terrifying, not because it was a threat, but because it was a declaration of ownership over a future he had no right to claim. "She is Sophia Vance," Ilara shot back, stepping between him and the child, positioning herself as a physical barrier. "And she is protected. I spent 7 years building a wall against you. You think you can walk in here with a fake name and a cut, and just—" "I didn't choose the name, you did," Rocco cut in softly, his eyes narrowed. "Leo Smith. That was the name I gave you. You chose it for her birth records, didn't you? A reminder. A piece of the past you couldn't quite kill." The truth of his accusation landed like a punch. Ilara sank onto the stool, defeated. "I did it to keep her safe. My life is quiet, predictable. Your life is a constant war zone. If they knew about her, if your enemies knew about her, she wouldn't survive a week. This was the obstacle that tested their relationship, her desperate need for distance, his instantaneous need for possession and protection. The romantic subplot began to develop through this shared, devastating vulnerability. Rocco didn't argue. He spoke of his childhood, of the night he lost his sister, the memory of her bright red hair, just like Sophia's, being the catalyst for his entire brutal career. I built the Bellini empire on the promise that no one would ever take anything from me again, Rocco said, his voice raw. That promise extends to her. To Sophia. He reached out, not touching her, but hovering near her hand. Tell me who called me. Who warned me to come here? Ilara hesitated, staring at the floor. I did. When the news hit about the leak, I knew they would trace you. I sent you here because this is the only place you ever felt safe enough to drop your guard. I needed you far away from the city. Thank you, Rocco breathed, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through the rock facade. Now, we work together. My enemies are closing in, and they are looking for anything I value. Over the next few days, Rocco installed himself at the cottage, using his connections to sweep the area. He discovered that the warning he received was only partly effective. His pursuers, a rival crime syndicate headed by a man named Silas Thorne, were already in the vicinity, looking for the stolen ledger containing critical account codes. Rocco's presence in Port Blossom drew unintended scrutiny. A seemingly harmless local fisherman, Jedediah, started asking Ilara pointed questions about the new handyman at the old cottage, serving as the first red herring. Rocco initially suspected Jedediah was a local informant for Thorne. Rocco and Ilara established a shaky truce. She treated his minor wound, but her focus was entirely on co-parenting their newfound secret. They shared strained dinners where Sophia acted as the unwitting, joyful intermediary. Sophia would chatter endlessly about the sea, and Rocco, who hadn't smiled in years, found his lips twitching at her serious pronouncements about local seagulls. One evening, while Ilara was working late, Rocco listened to Sophia reading a book. He realized the real threat wasn't the Bellini rivals, but the internal network that had betrayed him. The fisherman, Jedediah, he was asking about an old boat, not me, Rocco told Ilara later that night, as they sat in strained silence in the cottage kitchen, sharing a bottle of cheap wine. I followed him. He's just searching for a sunken family heirloom. But the person who called me said they knew where I hide. You hid here under the name Leo Vance, Ilara reminded him. Exactly, Rocco whispered. Only 2 people knew about Leo Vance. You, and Dominic. Dominic was Rocco's closest childhood friend and the consigliere of the Bellini family, a man Rocco trusted implicitly, second only to Marco. Rocco had tasked Dominic with destroying all records of the Leo Vance alias years ago. The threat isn't just external, Thorne, but deeply internal, Dominic. Dominic, the man who was supposed to be Rocco's eyes and ears, now became the prime suspect for the betrayal. If Dominic knew about Leo Vance, he knew about the lighthouse cottage. If Dominic is the leak, the threat is exponentially higher, Rocco confessed, a moment of deep vulnerability. He knows every single vulnerability I have. And now, he knows about you. Ilara looked at him, her fear transforming into determination. Then we don't run, Rocco. We stand here and we protect her. Together. The shared commitment to Sophia deepened their connection beyond the volatile romance of the past, forging a new, stronger bond driven by parenthood. Rocco was focused entirely on Dominic, running complex, high-risk remote surveillance operations from the cottage. He needed proof that his trusted consigliere was the leak who had betrayed the family and, worse, endangered Sophia. Meanwhile, Ilara was consumed by guilt, feeling every routine interaction with Sophia was a lie. One night, the stress finally broke through Ilara's composure. After putting Sophia to bed, she found Rocco at the window, not watching for enemies, but staring out at the lighthouse beam sweeping the dark water. "I need to tell you everything," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not just about Sophia, but why I left you 7 years ago." Rocco turned. This was the moment of deep, shared vulnerability. He needed to know the truth behind the woman who haunted his past and the child who was his future. "When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't keep her near you," Ilara began, tears finally falling. "But there was something else. The reason I knew your real name, Rocco Bellini, wasn't because I Googled you after we met. It was because I was working near the city, and I had seen you before." Rocco waited, his face impassive. "7 years ago, you were involved in a chaotic ambush downtown, near the courthouse. You were injured, but you survived. Your rivals didn't. There were 3 casualties." Ilara paused, clutching her hands tightly. "One of those casualties was my younger brother, Caleb." The revelation hit Rocco like a physical blow. Caleb. A name he vaguely remembered being on the periphery of the collateral damage report, a young student, an innocent bystander. He was just walking home from his night shift, Rocco. He was 21. "You didn't pull the trigger, but your war did." Ilara's voice was sharp with agonizing pain. "When I realized the man I had fallen in love with, the kind, quiet Leo, was the very man whose life caused the death of my brother, I panicked. The decision to run wasn't just to protect Sophia from your life, it was to protect you from my vengeance, and to protect myself from the guilt of loving the man who took everything from me." Ilara is the sister of an innocent victim killed during Rocco's ascent to power. Her love for him is inextricably tied to her grief and guilt. This revelation completely shifts the story's dynamic. The conflict isn't just about the mafia, but about absolute, personal tragedy. Rocco stepped back, the truth dismantling his foundation. He hadn't just lost his family, he had unwittingly destroyed hers, too. Everything he believed, that his control protected the innocent, was a lie. His guilt was a gaping, new wound. Rocco was shaken, but the external threat didn't pause. That night, Marco called from New York. "Boss, the leak is contained." It wasn't Dominic, Marco reported, his voice tight. Thorne's men hit the city first, but they were tracking something else. The ledger. They were specifically looking for the old Bellini records. They thought you were the one who had them. If it wasn't Dominic, then who knew I went by Leo Vance? Rocco asked, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with terrifying precision. The only other person who had clearance to scrub that alias from the family archive was the one who created it, Boss. Marco's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. It was the lawyer. Anthony Rossi. He's been working with Thorne for years, selling our secrets piece by piece, hoping to replace the Bellini leadership. The true traitor is Anthony Rossi, the family's venerable, seemingly loyal legal counsel. The conspiracy is much larger and deeper than a simple rivalry, it's a systematic corporate dismantling. This elevated the stakes to their highest point. Rossi wasn't just after Rocco's territory, he was after the legacy, the hidden, legitimate assets the Bellini family used to protect their children and elders. And he knew exactly where to look for leverage, the woman who went by Vance and the child he would be compelled to protect. The final piece of information arrived moments later. Marco had intercepted a coded message meant for Thorne. It wasn't about the ledger, it was about Ilara. Rocco showed Alara the transcript on his encrypted phone. It was simple, horrifying, and directed at the cottage. Target, Dr. Vance. If asset is recovered, leverage is assured. If not, eliminate collateral. The word collateral meant Sophia. Alara's grief over Caleb instantly evaporated, replaced by a fierce, maternal rage. They won't touch her, she vowed. Rossi knew everything, Alara, Rocco said, pulling her into a desperate embrace, their romantic connection solidified by the shared, life-or-death threat to their daughter. He knew about Caleb. He knew about us. He knew this secret would bring me running back to you, and he used you as the bait to draw me out. He didn't want the ledger, he wanted the heir. Rocco's fear had fully materialized. The life he ran from had found the life he desperately wanted. The man who had been shattered by a child's broken whimper was now ready to become the monster he needed to be to protect her. The confrontation with Rossi's plot and the agonizing revelation about Caleb forced Rocco and Alara into a desperate, unified front, but it couldn't erase the central, corrosive conflict, Rocco's methods versus Alara's morality. Rocco knew he couldn't fight a full-scale assault in Port Blossom with Sophia present. The only option was to use himself as bait to draw Rossi out, while moving Sophia and Alara to a fully secured Bellini safe house in Canada, accessible only via a treacherous coastal boat route known to few. Marco will be here by dawn. He will take you and Sophia, Rocco ordered, his voice brooking no argument. You go dark. Do not contact me until I tell you it's safe. Alara's face was grim. She was terrified but saw the logic. And you? What's your plan? Rossi thinks I value the assets more than my life, Rocco said, loading weapons into a travel bag. I'm going to make him think I'm running with the ledger. I'll lead him away from the coast, back toward the mainland cities. Once Sophia is safe, I'll deal with him. The separation was agonizing. It felt like 7 years ago all over again, only now the stakes were a child's life, not just their hearts. The romantic interests were separated, their connection threatened by the sheer, crushing weight of Rocco's world. At 4 a.m., the first blow fell. Marco, driving the transport vehicle containing the escape boat's coordinates, was ambushed 20 miles outside of Port Blossom. Rossi's forces, far better prepared than Rocco anticipated, had intercepted the coded communication. An hour later, a terrified Marco managed to send one cryptic text to Rocco, lawyer knew. He has the route. Need help. Rocco realized with cold horror that Rossi hadn't just traced the alias. He had a deep mole inside Marco's team, a man named Silvio, who had been feeding them location data. Rocco was blind. The situation became seemingly insurmountable. The escape route was compromised, the backup was disabled, and the enemy was converging on the cottage. Rocco, acting on instinct, rushed to the small dock where the boat was supposed to be waiting. He was too late. Silvio, standing beside two large, silent figures, was waiting for him. The boss thought you'd try to run, Rocco, Silvio sneered, holding up a phone that displayed the cottage's GPS coordinates. We won't hurt the collateral, provided you cooperate. But if you try to leave, she becomes a liability. Rocco was forced to surrender. He was tied and shoved into a black van, feeling the crushing despair of complete defeat. He had tried to protect them by running, and in doing so, he had walked right into the trap, leaving Alara and Sophia defenseless. His deepest fear, the loss of his family due to his own actions, was being realized. At the cottage, Alara watched the sun rise, painting the sea a brutal, indifferent orange. She found the note Rocco left, go to the old lighthouse tower. Do not leave the structure until you see the all clear. She grabbed Sophia, who was crying, not from fear, but from the trauma of the hasty retreat. Where's Rocco? Sophia whimpered, clinging to her knitted elephant. He's protecting us, sweetie, Alara lied, pushing down her own desperate fear. They reached the isolated, abandoned lighthouse tower. It was cold, dark, and smelled of rust and decay. Alara locked the heavy wooden door, knowing it wouldn't hold long. Through the salt-crusted window, she saw 3 dark figures approaching the cottage, not gently, but systematically breaking down the door. They were searching. They knew they were close. Alara hugged Sophia fiercely, pressing her cheek against her daughter's red hair. The silence of the lighthouse amplified her racing heart. She was a doctor, a healer, trained to save lives in controlled environments, not fight a war against trained killers. She had no weapon, no backup, and no escape. They were trapped in an obsolete, rusting fortress, and the enemy was literally moments away from finding them. Alara faced her deepest fear, the inability to protect her child. Suddenly, Sophia looked up, her little face streaked with tears, but her gray eyes fixed on something on the floor. She pointed at a loose brick. Mama, look. Ellie's hiding hole. The observation was nonsensical, but it forced Alara to look. Behind the loose brick was a small recess in the wall, a crude hiding spot, likely created by children generations ago. It was too small for Alara, but perfectly sized for a terrified 5-year-old. Alara knew she couldn't hide with Sophia. If they found her, they would use Sophia to find Rocco. She had to become the bait. She had to separate herself from her child one last time. She hugged Sophia, whispering a promise she didn't know if she could keep. You are the bravest girl in the world, my sunbeam. You stay here, quiet as a mouse, and don't come out until the lamp lights up. Alara kissed Sophia, pushed her gently into the hidden recess, replaced the brick, and stumbled to the lighthouse door, clutching a broken piece of metal pipe, a desperate, futile weapon. She unlocked the door just as she heard the footsteps approaching the tower. She was alone, facing the darkness, despair consuming her, convinced she would never see Rocco or Sophia again. Alara stood in the gloom of the lighthouse, the broken pipe clutched in her hand, listening to the ominous crunch of boots on the gravel outside. She was cornered, but the absolute panic of the previous hours had solidified into a fierce, cold resolve. She wouldn't just be bait, she would be a diversion. She had to buy time for Rocco, wherever he was, and time for Sophia. As the heavy door shuttered under a forceful kick, Alara didn't charge. She darted up the winding, rusted staircase, knowing the narrow, vertical space was her only advantage. The men, 3 of them, large and brutal, followed, their heavy footfalls echoing in the iron shell of the tower. Alara didn't run to the top. She stopped on the first landing, hidden by the circular wall. She had always defined herself by her healing hands and her moral code. But facing death, she realized the strength Rocco had seen in her 7 years ago wasn't just compassion, it was resilience. The survival of her daughter was the only morality that mattered now. When the lead man rounded the bend, Alara slammed the pipe against the metal railing, creating a deafening clang that momentarily disoriented him. As he winced, she shoved a heavy, rusted lantern from the wall mount down the stairwell. It didn't hit anyone, but the chaos of the noise, the scraping metal, and the darkness bought her precious seconds. She scrambled higher, reaching the top platform, the old, massive lamp mechanism looming over her. She knew she couldn't outfight them, but she could outsmart them. Looking out over the sweeping ocean view, she remembered Sophia's whimpered words at the midpoint, Ellie's hiding hole, until the lamp lights up. Sophia's innocent logic, combined with Rocco's instruction to stay put until the all clear, sparked a crucial realization in Alara. The lighthouse lamp had been dark for decades. But if she could make it work, it would not just signal the all clear to Sophia, but it would also signal the location of the fight to anyone observing from a distance, specifically, Rocco's compromised lieutenant, Marco, who was likely hiding nearby, waiting for a chance to move. The key to solving the conflict is not escaping, but using the very structure that had hidden them for years, the lighthouse, to broadcast their location and force the final confrontation on their terms. Meanwhile, hours away, Rocco was being transported to an isolated warehouse, the same cold despair from Part 6 consuming him. But as they drove, his rage crystallized into pure, calculating focus. He forced himself to confront the guilt he carried, the death of Caleb. He realized that Alara, despite the heartbreak, had chosen to protect him by running, proving her love was real, tragic, but real. His inner strength returned when he found a sliver of opportunity. The man who had betrayed him, Silvio, was driving the van. He was focused on the road, relaxed by the capture of the rock. Rocco, using a concealed razor blade he had meticulously attached to his cufflink before his capture, began sawing through the zip-tie restraints around his hands. He worked in the absolute darkness of the van, fueled by the image of Sophia's gray eyes and the memory of Alara's fierce determination. He freed his hands just as the van slowed. He needed to escape, but he needed the information first. Silvio, Rocco's voice was low and lethal. Tell me exactly where you left the doctor and the child. Silvio laughed, convinced Rocco was still restrained. Too late, boss. They'll be on a boat soon. Headed to. Before Silvio could finish the name of the destination, Rocco struck. He choked Silvio into unconsciousness, grabbed the driver's discarded sidearm, and forced the van to a halt. Rocco didn't go after Rossi. He grabbed Silvio's radio and began transmitting, using an emergency code only Marco would recognize. He knew where Alara was, and he was coming back for the final fight. Marco, battered but alive, was holed up in a fishing shack down the coast, nursing a broken rib. He received the coded distress signal from the lighthouse's coordinates, a signal that should have been coming from the Bellini escape boat. He looked out to sea. In the distance, the Port Blossom lighthouse, which had been dark for his entire life, suddenly flared to life. The massive, brilliant beam swept across the pre-dawn sky, a dazzling, unmistakable beacon. You didn't run, Alara, Marco whispered, understanding. You called the fight. Marco grabbed the remaining 2 loyal men he had brought north. The lighthouse beam was the key. It told the enemy where to go, but it also told the allies where to fight. Rocco was coming, Marco was moving, and Alara was holding the line. The final confrontation was set. Alara's courageous action, igniting the ancient lighthouse lamp, bathed the small island in a brilliant, revolving column of light. She stood exposed on the catwalk, facing the 3 armed thugs who had chased her up the stairs. Where is the girl? The lead man, a brute named Vargo, demanded, his voice thick with threat. Far away from you, Alara lied, praying Sophia was silent in the recess below. Just as Vargo raised his weapon, the lighthouse door below exploded inward with a deafening crash. Rocco, now a man stripped of his expensive suit and purely driven by paternal fury, charged in, followed closely by a limping Marco and his 2 loyal operatives. The lighthouse tower became a vertical, enclosed battlefield. Rocco, utilizing the narrow structure to his advantage, moved with the terrifying efficiency of a man fighting not for money or power, but for his child. He didn't just fight. He systematically dismantled his enemies, using his knowledge of close-quarters combat and the tower's geometry. Rocco and Marco secured the lower levels, but Vargo and his remaining man were still on the catwalk with Alara. "The lawyer is waiting for your return, boss," Vargo shouted down, leveling his gun at Alara. "He has the ledger. He wants the exchange, the child for the financial future." "The financial future is dead, Vargo. And you're just the cleanup crew," Rocco roared, ascending the final flight of stairs 2 at a time. As Rocco reached the catwalk, Vargo was distracted for a crucial second, aiming his weapon. Alara, leveraging her training as a surgeon, which demanded steady hands, swift precision, and an intimate knowledge of anatomy, didn't run. She used the heavy, rusted metal mechanism of the main lamp. With a desperate heave, she turned the wheel, causing the massive lens assembly to pivot violently. The movement knocked Vargo off balance just long enough for Rocco to launch himself across the platform. The fight was brutal, ending with Rocco disarming Vargo and throwing him over the railing onto the lower landing, incapacitating him. The fight was over, but the climax wasn't complete. From the dark, rocky beach below, a luxury sedan pulled up. Out stepped Anthony Rossi, the lawyer, immaculate in a coat, holding a small, aged leather-bound book, the stolen ledger, in one hand, and a secured phone in the other. "A dramatic backdrop, Rocco," Rossi called up, his voice echoing with practiced smugness. "Let's finalize this. You and your men stand down. You sign over the legitimate assets. I will release the woman and the child, and you can live your quiet life. I have the ledger, Rocco. Without this, your foundation is dust." Rocco looked down, standing beside Alara. His gray eyes, now reflecting the harsh light of the lamp, met Rossi's. "You think I came back here for a ledger, Anthony?" Rocco's voice was dangerously low. "You think I risked everything for money?" Rocco reached into his jacket and pulled out the small, silver locket, the one containing the picture of his sister. He didn't look at the picture. Instead, he flipped it over, revealing a minuscule, almost invisible SD card glued to the back. "That ledger is a decoy, Anthony. The real ledger, the full, uncompromised, authenticated financial data of every illegal transaction you and Thorne made over the last decade, along with the proof of your conspiracy, is right here. I transferred it 3 weeks ago when I first suspected the internal leak. I knew you'd go after the symbol." He held the SD card up in the blinding light of the lamp. "You wanted the future of the Bellini family? You were looking at the wrong kind of asset." He pointed toward the hidden recess below. "The future is safely hidden. And the past is coming for you." Rossi's face, for the first time, twisted into pure, desperate rage. He realized he had risked everything, not for control, but for a worthless decoy book. In his fury, Rossi tossed the ledger aside and lunged for the sedan, reaching for a hidden weapon. But Marco, anticipating the move, had already circled the structure. Marco and the others quickly secured Rossi. Rocco descended the stairs. He stood over Rossi, the man who had traded his trust and endangered his child. "You didn't just betray the family, Anthony. You betrayed me," Rocco stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "And when you brought Alara and Sophia into this, you crossed the line I built my life to defend." Justice was served not by violence, but by exposure. Marco had secured Rossi, and the authorities, tipped off by Rocco's pre-planned, encrypted data dump activated the moment the lighthouse lamp ignited, were minutes away. Rocco looked up to the catwalk. Alara was descending slowly, her face streaked with sweat and grime, but her eyes shining with relief and triumph. He moved toward her, not as the Mafia boss, but as the man who had just fought to the death for his family. He pulled her into his arms, a shared moment of relief and profound, earned love. He was bruised, she was terrified, but they were victorious. Thank you for joining me on Rocco and Alara's journey from devastating tragedy to hard-won triumph at the lighthouse. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments which moment made your heart race the most. Was it the broken whimper at 2 a.m., the midpoint revelation of Alara's brother, or the final confrontation on the lighthouse catwalk? Tomorrow, I have another incredible story that will make you believe in the power of truth and second chances. Until then, remember, you are braver than your fears, stronger than your past, and worthy of a love that fights for you as fiercely as you fight for it.